A last-minute flight path change and contradicting weather reports. Now, these are some of the pieces of the investigation into what happened when Miami Air Flight 293 ended up in the St. Johns River about 2 years ago. On your side, Renata Gregorio breaks down the nearly 1,600-page report.
A major point in the report is the inconsistency between pilot and co-pilot about the weather. Instead of coming straight here to NAS JAX, the plane took a last-minute turn and ended up going right through a storm. Why did Miami Air Flight 293 from Guantanamo Bay and the more than 140 people on board end up landing in the St. Johns River in May 2019? The National Transportation Safety Board's report released Wednesday shows the investigation's findings, not a determination of what happened. The nearly 1,600-page report reveals Captain Gabriel Cosentino was at the controls and, according to the report, told investigators there was no concern about the weather as the flight route took them west of it, adding he did not remember the weather report received from the approach control. However, First Officer Claudio Marcelo Jose Lafranca reportedly told investigators that there were thunderstorms developing and at last check recalled last seeing the airspeed at 100 knots and they were getting close to the end of the runway and not slowing. The report also reveals one of the two evacuation door slides failed to inflate, as did one 46-person life raft. The investigation finds the life raft's inflation hoses were not connected and states a review of the maintenance procedures where the parts were last tested is needed for a risk assessment. You can find the full report on firstcoastnews.com. I'm Renata Gregorio outside NAS JAX. First Coast News on your side.